Ifeanyi Benifo had grown used to hiding her exhaustion behind a warm, practiced smile. The lobby of Emerald Suites glistened with marble floors and chandeliers, but to her it was simply the stage where she survived. She stood at the reception desk in her neatly pressed uniform, a blue jacket a size too big for her slender frame, greeting guests with "Good evening, sir," even when her stomach twisted with hunger. Every night, she prayed she wouldn't be dismissed for one mistake, for her mother and younger siblings in Succa depended on the salary she sent home. The hotel had taught her to swallow pride, to plaster politeness across her face, and to stay invisible unless called upon. But that night was different. The doors swung open, and in strode Chukwudi Chucksnady, the kind of man who turned heads without trying. His presence seemed to rearrange the very air, commanding attention, making everyone, staff and guests alike, straighten their spines. Chucks, in his late 20s, was already a name whispered in Enugu's elite circles. The young millionaire who had inherited scraps of his father's failed construction company and turned it into a thriving empire. He moved with the confidence of someone who never heard the word no. His gold wristwatch glinted as he handed over his ID card, his cologne filling the space with bold notes of oud and spice. He had the sort of careless charm that could make a woman laugh without realizing she had, and the sort of arrogance that suggested he thought the world owed him applause. Ifeanyi, with her quiet grace, didn't quite fit the mold of women he usually noticed, but something in her nervous eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly while holding his booking form, drew his attention. He lingered longer than necessary at the desk, teasing her about her handwriting, asking her if she ever smiled beyond duty. She tried to remain professional, but his laughter was intoxicating, his confidence overwhelming. When she handed him his room keycard, his fingers brushed hers, sending a heat up her arm she couldn't explain. "You should visit the rooftop lounge after your shift," he said casually, his voice carrying the command of someone unaccustomed to refusal. Ifeanyi shook her head, but the seed had been planted. Hours later, curiosity gnawed at her resolve. After her shift ended, she found herself climbing the stairs, each step heavy with hesitation and anticipation. On the rooftop, he was waiting with 2 glasses of wine, his smile disarming, his words weaving a spell around her. That night, the boundaries between duty and desire blurred, and Ifeanyi, the girl who had lived her life cautiously, took a reckless step into a moment that would alter her destiny. Morning light crept into the hotel suite, casting golden stripes across the white sheets. Ifeanyi stirred, her heart pounding as realization sank in. Chucks was already dressed, his tailored shirt crisp, his movements swift. He didn't look at her the way she hoped he might, with tenderness or curiosity. Instead, he checked his phone, adjusted his watch, and gave her a half-smile that felt like dismissal. "You'll be fine, right?" he asked casually, not waiting for an answer as he slipped his wallet into his pocket. For a moment, she considered asking for his number, but the lump in her throat made her remain silent. He kissed her forehead absent-mindedly, like one might pat a dog on the head, and walked out of the door with the same careless swagger he had entered her life with. The sound of the latch clicking shut felt like the closing of a chapter she hadn't even begun to write. Days turned into weeks, and the absence of his call gnawed at her. Each time her phone buzzed, she hoped it would be him, but it never was. When nausea began to creep into her mornings, she dismissed it as stress until her body refused to lie any longer. A test confirmed her worst fears. She was pregnant. Alone, unmarried, and working a job that barely kept her afloat, the news weighed on her like a stone tied to her chest. Panic set in. How would she feed a child? What would her mother say? And most of all, how could she face the world branded as another careless girl who got carried away? She tried to trace him, asking discreetly if anyone at the hotel knew more about him. But Chucks was a man who moved in shadows and circles she could never reach. His world was untouchable, hers fragile and small. Every night, she wrestled with shame and fear. Should she attempt to end it? Should she write to him, even though she had no address, no way to reach him? In the end, her quiet strength won. She whispered to the life growing inside her belly, promising never to abandon it the way she had been abandoned. Yet, deep inside, bitterness took root. She replayed that careless morning, his smile, his arrogance, the way he walked away, as if she were nothing. It was then she understood. She had been just another fleeting pleasure to him. But to her, that night had become a lifetime sentence. By the 4th month, her belly had begun to swell, a secret she could no longer tuck beneath her oversized jackets. The whispers began slowly, a cleaner caught staring, a fellow receptionist smirking as she adjusted her belt. Soon, the gossip grew teeth. "Did you hear? Ifyananya let a guest have his way with her," one whispered. "Who knows if the child even has a father," said another. Shame followed her down the hallways like a shadow she couldn't shake. The manager, a sharp-nosed man with little patience, summoned her one morning. His words were clinical, his eyes cold. "You violated the image of this establishment. Pack your things." There was no room for pleading. She was dismissed without compensation, stripped of dignity, cast aside like a soiled cloth. The news reached her family before she could soften it. Her mother's silence on the phone hurt worse than words. Neighbors shook their heads when she passed, their judgment heavy in their eyes. Ifyananya avoided their gaze, keeping her chin lifted, even as shame burned her insides. She took to wearing long wrappers, trying to cover her growing stomach, but she couldn't hide the truth forever. Hunger became a constant companion. Without her hotel job, she picked up scraps of work where she could, washing clothes, selling food by the roadside, anything to keep body and soul together. The father of her unborn child was a millionaire, yet she was left to grovel for coins. But amid the humiliation, a fire kindled inside her. She refused to let the child growing within her become a symbol of shame. Each night she knelt by her bed, whispering prayers with trembling lips. "You will live," she told her unborn child. "You will not be a curse. You will be my joy." Her strength didn't come from absence of fear, but from a stubborn refusal to let despair win. Though the world saw her as fallen, she began to carry herself with a quiet dignity. The dignity of a woman who had nothing left to lose but the promise of the life within her. The day labor began was one of the stormiest of her life. Rain battered the corrugated iron roofs, thunder rolled across the Enugu skyline, and Ifyananya's screams echoed through the dimly lit maternity ward. Alone on the hospital bed, sweat pouring down her face, she gripped the sheets as waves of pain tore through her. The nurses, tired and underpaid, muttered instructions without comfort. She cried for her mother, but there was no one to hold her hand. Hours passed in agony until at last, with a final gut-wrenching scream, 2 cries split the air. Twins. Boys. The sound filled her with both terror and awe. Weak and trembling, she reached out as the nurse placed the tiny, wriggling bodies on her chest. They were fragile, their fists balled, their eyes shut tight, yet to her, they were the most beautiful miracle she had ever seen. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered promises. "I will not fail you. I will not let you grow feeling unwanted. You are my sons, my life, my everything." She named them Samtichukwu and Kaimila, names that carried hope and faith. As she cradled them, her exhaustion nearly swallowed her whole, but the warmth of their bodies kept her tethered to life. She almost died that night. The doctor later said her blood pressure had plummeted dangerously. But something beyond medicine had carried her through, the sheer will of a mother refusing to leave her children behind. When she finally left the hospital, cradling her newborn sons, she walked into a world no kinder than before. Landlords threatened eviction, neighbors whispered louder, and food was scarce. But Ifyananya's eyes carried a new light. Where there had been fear, there was now resolve. She no longer lived just for herself. Each drop of shame, each hunger pang, each insult from the world became fuel. She would survive for them. The night that had broken her had also given her the 2 souls who would keep her alive. The years that followed tested Ifyananya in ways she never imagined. She worked herself to the bone, often leaving home before dawn with the twins strapped to her back, returning long after the sun had set. She picked up whatever job she could find, cashiering in a small supermarket, cooking food to sell in the market, even scrubbing rich women's floors. Some employers mocked her, others pitied her, but none saw her as equal. Yet she endured, because every naira she earned meant diapers, school fees, and food for her boys. Samtachukwu and Kaimila grew in strength, their laughter filling their small one-room flat, their innocence shielding them from the harsh realities their mother faced. When neighbors mocked, Ifeanyi smiled at her sons, reminding herself that their joy mattered more than the world's scorn. Meanwhile, far across the city, Chucks lived like a man untouched by consequence. His business empire grew. His name appeared in newspapers. His parties lit up Enugu nights. He boasted of being self-made, of carrying no family burdens. Women adorned his arms, cars filled his garage, and money flowed endlessly. Yet beneath his arrogance, there lingered a hollowness he never admitted. He lived surrounded by noise, but often returned to silence. The emptiness he drowned in alcohol and fleeting affairs was one he couldn't name, and wouldn't discover until fate forced him to confront it. For Ifeanyi, each year, hardened her resolve. She raised her sons to be respectful, teaching them to greet elders properly, to pray before meals, and to study hard despite their lack of luxuries. On nights when hunger gnawed, she made a game of pretending their half-meal was a feast. She often whispered to herself, "They will not suffer as I have." She looked at her twins, their eyes, their smiles, their dimples, and sometimes when the world was quiet, she thought of their father. Not with longing, but with steel. If he ever returned, she would never let him take from her what she had built through sweat and tears. The day was meant to be ordinary. Ifeanyi had taken Samtachukwu and Kaimila to the plaza on Ogwi Road to buy groceries. The twins, full of energy, darted between shelves, arguing over biscuits, their voices ringing like tiny bells across the supermarket. She wore a simple Ankara gown, her head tied with a plain scarf, her face lined with the tiredness of survival, but her dignity stood unshaken. As she reached for a carton of milk, a shadow fell across the aisle. She turned, and her heart clenched. Standing only a few feet away was Chukwudi Nadi, clad in an expensive Navy senator with polished shoes that shone under the lights. For a moment, time froze. His eyes, sharp and calculating in business boardrooms, widened in disbelief as they locked on the twins. The boys laughed, flashing dimples that mirrored his own. Chuck's breath caught, his swagger collapsing. He wasn't just staring at children. He was staring at his reflection multiplied. Ifeanyi felt her body go cold. She had imagined this moment countless times in nightmares, running into him by accident, the look of shock on his face, the questions that would spill from his lips. She had always vowed that if it ever happened, she would hold her head high and walk away. Yet now, with the twins tugging at her wrapper and asking for chocolate, her chest tightened, and her palms grew clammy. Memories of the hotel lobby, of the night she lost herself to his charm, flooded back like ghosts. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him to vanish, but all she could manage was a stiff, controlled nod before pushing the trolley toward the checkout counter. Chucks, however, wasn't ready to let the moment slip. He followed, his steps unsteady, his heart pounding louder than any boardroom deal had ever made it. "Excuse me, Ifeanyi." His voice cracked with disbelief, calling a name he wasn't sure he remembered correctly. She didn't respond. He glanced at the twins again, the arch of their brows, the shape of their noses, the way their laughter echoed his childhood photographs. His throat went dry. "Those boys, who are they?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. Ifeanyi turned sharply, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and fury. "They are mine," she spat, before turning her back and storming out of the plaza, the twins trailing behind her. Shoppers watched in confusion as the millionaire, normally untouchable and composed, stood frozen, looking like a man who had just seen his past rise to accuse him. The next day, Chucks could not shake the image of the boys from his mind. He found himself pacing his mansion, ignoring calls from business partners, his mind clouded. He had prided himself on control, but this discovery rattled him. He decided to confirm what his heart already knew. Those boys were his. Days later, he returned to the plaza, hoping fate would strike again. And it did. He spotted Ifeananya guiding the twins out of the store, her arms loaded with groceries. Without hesitation, he strode over, his presence commanding attention. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but urgent. She stiffened, clutching her shopping bags tighter. Shoppers turned their heads, whispering, recognizing the famous millionaire confronting a woman who clearly wanted nothing to do with him. Talk? After 5 years of silence? After vanishing like a thief? Ifeanyanya's voice was sharp, trembling not with weakness, but with long-suppressed rage. "You had your chance. You chose pride. You chose pleasure. You chose yourself." Her words cut like knives, drawing curious stares from the gathering crowd. Chuck's jaw tightened. He tried to explain, to reach for excuses, but her glare silenced him. The twins, sensing tension, clung to her wrapper, wide-eyed and confused. One tugged at her sleeve and whispered, "Mummy, who is he? Why does he look like us?" The question, innocent yet piercing, struck both adults like a hammer. Chuck's face broke, his eyes softening with tears he hadn't shed in years. "Because I am your father," he whispered, his voice cracking. The plaza grew louder with gasps, but Ifeananya pulled the children close and stormed away, her dignity unshaken despite the storm inside her chest. That moment became gossip fodder in Enugu by nightfall. Social media buzzed with pictures of the confrontation. Whispers spread through circles of the elite. Who were these mysterious twins who bore the face of Chukwudineti? Why was the millionaire, usually so untouchable, chasing after a woman in plain Ankara? For Ifeananya, humiliation weighed heavy. She had worked for years to keep her life private, to shield her sons from gossip, only for him to drag their truth into the streets. For Chuck's, shame and longing clashed. The man who thought money could buy everything had learned there was something his wealth couldn't silence. The undeniable pull of blood and the cries of destiny demanding recognition. Chuck's wasn't the type of man who let questions linger unanswered. Days later, his black Lexus parked conspicuously outside the narrow compound where Ifeananya lived. Children pointed, neighbors whispered, and elders gathered on benches to watch the spectacle. In their small world, a billionaire's car parked outside a humble flat was like lightning striking dry earth. Ifeananya, returning from the market with the twins, froze at the sight of him leaning against the vehicle, his arms folded, his expression both tense and desperate. "We need to talk," he repeated, this time softer, almost pleading. She tried to brush past, but he followed, forcing his way into the cramped sitting room, where peeling paint and mismatched furniture screamed of years of sacrifice. Inside, the storm broke. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, pacing the tiny space. "Why did you keep them from me? They're my blood." His voice boomed, shaking the walls, but Ifeananya stood firm, her chin raised, her eyes aflame. "Your blood? You dare say that now? Where were you when I almost died giving birth? Where were you when I was thrown out of the hotel like trash? Where were you when these children cried from hunger, and I had to sell my dignity to feed them?" Her words, heavy with pain, echoed louder than his anger. The twins, frightened, hid behind her, peeking at the stranger who looked like them but sounded like thunder. Then came the question that silenced them all. "Mummy, why does he look like us?" one of the boys asked softly, his innocence slicing through the tension like a knife. Chuck's face crumbled, tears pricking his eyes as he sank onto the old sofa, burying his face in his hands. For the first time, the proud millionaire looked like a broken man. "Because I am your father," he admitted, his voice trembling. Silence filled the room, broken only by the boys' giggles as they repeated the word father, testing its weight on their tongues. Ifeananya turned her face away, tears streaming despite her resolve. She had vowed never to let him break her again, yet seeing him kneel before the children shook her. In that moment, Chuck's realized money and power meant nothing here. If he wanted a place in their lives, he would have to fight not with wealth, but with humility. The revelation did not stay hidden. In less than a week, word had reached the Nady household. Chuck's mother, a regal woman with deep pride in her family name, summoned him immediately. "Is it true?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Are those boys yours?" Chucks hesitated, then nodded. The silence that followed was heavy. His mother's face hardened. "Then they must be acknowledged. Our blood will not live in shame." She ordered him to bring the children to the family home. His younger siblings, always eager to tease him, whispered insults about hidden children and hotel babies. Chuck's pride burned hotter than ever, pushing him toward reckless resolve. Meanwhile, whispers spread among his business associates. Some questioned his judgment, wondering if scandal would harm deals. Rivals snickered behind his back. For the first time, Chucks felt cornered not by competitors, but by his own choices. He drank heavily at night, staring at pictures of the twins he had secretly snapped, haunted by the uncanny resemblance. His mother's words replayed in his mind, "They must be acknowledged." But Iphigenia's defiance stood like a wall between him and the children. He convinced himself that if she wouldn't bend, he would force her hand. Pride, fear, and desperation fused into a dangerous resolve. If he couldn't win her cooperation, he would take the children by any means necessary. When he arrived at Iphigenia's flat again, his tone had changed. No longer pleading, he was sharp, almost cold. "I will not be denied my children," he said, his eyes blazing. "If you don't let me take them, I will go to the courts. I have money, I have lawyers, I have power. Do you think you can stop me?" His words struck like daggers. Iphigenia stood trembling, but not with fear, with fury. She stepped forward, her face inches from his, her voice steady. "Try it. Try to buy what I built with tears, with sleepless nights, with prayers. Try to take them from me, and you will learn that not all battles are won with money." The twins, sensing danger, clung to her tightly. Chucks stormed out, slamming the door, leaving behind a silence thick with dread. For Iphigenia, fear mingled with anger. For Chucks, pride blinded him. A war between them had begun. The days that followed became unbearable. Chucks consulted lawyers, his pride pushing him toward a custody battle. His friends warned him to tread carefully, but he refused. "They are my sons," he declared in boardrooms and bars alike. To him, it was about more than fatherhood. It was about control, about reclaiming what he believed was his right. He prepared documents, rehearsed arguments, and pictured himself parading the twins before society as proof of his legacy. Yet every time he closed his eyes, he saw Iphigenia's fiery stare, her words cutting deeper than any legal threat. Still, his pride pressed him forward. For Iphigenia, the threat was like a sword hanging over her head. Nights became sleepless as she clutched her children close, imagining strangers dragging them away. Memories of childbirth returned, the pain, the blood, the loneliness. She whispered to her sons as they slept, "No one will take you from me, not even him." She sought advice from elders in her neighborhood, some urging her to beg for peace, others encouraging her to fight. Deep within, she knew she would never surrender. She had raised those boys when the world turned its back on her. No court, no lawyer, no millionaire could strip her of that bond. The conflict began spilling into the streets. Neighbors whispered louder, some taking her side, others marveling at the audacity of standing against Chuck's wealth. Business associates noticed the distraction clouding his mind. The once flawless millionaire now appeared in meetings distracted, snapping at staff, drowning himself in liquor after dark. For the first time, he realized his empire was cracking, not from rivals, but from his own pride. Yet he refused to admit it. Iphigenia, meanwhile, walked taller despite her fear. Her eyes carried fire, her steps unbroken. She would not bow, not now, not ever. And so the stage was set for a battle where money would clash with love, and pride would face a strength forged in pain. Despite the bitterness between their parents, the twins' innocence began to tear down walls. Samtachukwu and Kaimila had a natural curiosity about Chucks. The first time he bought them footballs and sneakers, their laughter rang through the compound as they ran circles around him, calling him uncle, while neighbors watched with raised brows. Iphigenia tried to scold them later, reminding them not to get too close, but their excitement was uncontainable. To them, he wasn't the man who abandoned their mother. He was simply the tall figure who looked like them, bought them treats, and made funny faces until their bellies hurt with laughter. Chucks, who had never known patience with children, found himself strangely addicted to their company. The way they clung to his legs, the way they fought to sit on his lap at the same time, and the way they proudly showed him their school books filled him with a joy he had never experienced in boardrooms. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be looked at as more than a millionaire, to be seen as a father. The pride that once pushed him toward a custody battle began to shift. He no longer wanted to take them by force. He wanted them to love him freely. But Iphigenia stood as a reminder of his failures. Every time she caught him with the children, her eyes were sharp, filled with warnings. She didn't trust him, and she made no effort to hide it. Chucks realized he couldn't bulldoze his way into her heart or the children's future. If he wanted a place in their lives, he had to earn it. And that realization planted the first seeds of humility in him. A foreign but necessary lesson. Determined to prove he wasn't the same arrogant man from years ago, Chucks began with small, quiet acts. He paid the boys' school fees without announcing it, allowing Iphigenia to discover it when she went to the school office, stunned and speechless. He arranged for her leaking roof to be repaired anonymously, until the children excitedly told her Uncle Chucks sent the workmen. He bought foodstuffs and left them at her doorstep, knocking once and disappearing before she could chase him away. These weren't grand gestures meant for show. They were deliberate, humble attempts to lighten her burdens. Iphigenia noticed, even though she pretended not to. At first, she bristled, thinking it was manipulation. But late at night, as she watched her children sleep, she found herself remembering the look on his face when he knelt in her living room, broken and tearful. She hated him for the pain he caused, but part of her saw glimpses of change she couldn't ignore. Still, her pride and her scars kept her guarded. She wasn't about to forgive easily. Chucks, meanwhile, found himself doing things he never imagined. He sat through nights of fever with the twins, holding wet cloths to their foreheads while Iphigenia rushed to buy medicine. He ate her simple meals of gari and vegetable soup without complaint, laughing with the children while she watched in silence. Each act stripped him further of his pride, but strangely, he felt freer. For once, he was living not as a millionaire, but as a man learning to love. But just as fragile trust began to bloom, the past returned to test them. One evening, as Chucks left Iphigenia's compound, a sleek car pulled up. From it stepped Gloria, one of his former mistresses, tall, beautiful, dripping with confidence. She eyed the flat with disdain before turning to Chucks. "So this is where you've been hiding? With a hotel girl and her bastards." Her voice dripped with venom, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Iphigenia, stepping out to see what the commotion was about, froze. The humiliation she had long fought to bury threatened to choke her as Gloria smirked at her, calling her a gold digger who had trapped a rich man with children. For a moment, Iphigenia expected Chucks to stay silent, to let the mistress humiliate her as proof that she was beneath him. But what happened next shocked her. Chucks stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't you ever call them that again. Those are my children, and she is their mother. Show respect or walk away." His words silenced Gloria, whose eyes widened at the unexpected defense. She hissed, spat on the ground, and stormed back into her car. Neighbors gasped, whispering among themselves. For the first time, Chucks had stood publicly by Iphigenia's side. Iphigenia's heart pounded as she led the children inside. She wanted to remain angry, to remind herself that one defense didn't erase years of abandonment. Yet deep inside, her heart softened slightly. Perhaps he wasn't just playing a role. Perhaps he was truly changing. Still, she told herself not to trust too quickly. Change, she knew, was not measured in words, but in consistency. And though Chucks had surprised her that night, she needed more proof before lowering her guard. While Chucks fought to prove himself at home, his empire was beginning to crumble. Rumors of the custody battle had spread beyond Enugu, making headlines in national business columns. Potential investors questioned his judgment, wary of partnering with a man seen as unstable. Board members whispered about his distraction, noting how often he missed meetings or sat in silence, lost in thought about the twins. Contracts were delayed, partnerships dissolved, and rivals circled like vultures. For a man who had built his name on control and precision, the cracks were unbearable. Nights found him drowning in whiskey, staring at documents he no longer had the strength to read. He replayed Ifeanyi's words. "Where were you when I bled? Where were you when they cried from hunger?" Each sentence struck harder than the financial losses he faced. He had been successful, yes, but at what cost? The life he had built fell hollow compared to the laughter of his children and the quiet dignity of their mother. For the first time in his life, Chucks questioned the very foundation of his existence. Meanwhile, Ifeanyi noticed his decline. She saw the weariness in his face, the slump in his once proud shoulders, the silence in his once booming voice. Part of her wanted to gloat, to remind him that pride comes before a fall. But another part pitted him. She saw a man stripped of his arrogance, slowly breaking, not under the weight of rivals, but under the truth he could no longer outrun. In her heart, she began to wonder if this was the man God had intended all along, not the arrogant millionaire, but the humbled father learning what really mattered. The turning point came one Sunday afternoon. Chucks arrived at Ifeanyi's flat, not in his usual SUV, but on foot, dressed simply in jeans and a polo shirt. He carried no gifts, no lawyers, no threats. Instead, he asked if he could join them for lunch. Ifeanyi hesitated, but the twins jumped with excitement, pulling him inside. For the first time, they all sat at the same table, eating rice and beans, laughing at the twins' silly jokes, the air filled with warmth instead of tension. Chucks didn't boast, didn't command. He simply listened, nodded, and allowed himself to be part of something bigger than his pride. After lunch, Ifeanyi watched him help the boys with their homework. He leaned over their exercise books, patient and gentle, correcting mistakes with laughter instead of anger. The twins beamed, proud to show their work. For Ifeanyi, the sight was disarming. This was not the arrogant man who had threatened to steal her children. This was a man learning humility through fatherhood. Her heart, long hardened by pain, softened slightly, though she didn't admit it aloud. That evening, as he prepared to leave, Chucks turned to her. "I don't want to fight you anymore," he said quietly. "I don't want to take them from you. I just want a chance to be here, to be their father, and maybe someday more." Ifeanyi looked at him for a long moment, searching his eyes for deceit. She saw none. She didn't reply, but the tears that threatened to spill told her she was no longer looking at the man who had abandoned her 5 years ago. She was looking at someone who, slowly but surely, was becoming a father, and perhaps eventually something even greater. It was a quiet evening, the kind of evening when the city hummed softly in the background and the compound children's laughter faded into the distance. Chucks had asked to see Ifeanyi alone, without the twins bounding around as distraction. She reluctantly agreed, and together they sat on the worn sofa of her small living room. For a long while, silence stretched between them. Then Chuck spoke, his voice lower than she had ever heard it, stripped of arrogance. He told her about the emptiness of his mansion, how despite the wealth and acclaim, he often returned home to silence, so heavy it pressed on his chest. He admitted that when he first saw the twins, he felt both terror and awe. Terror because they reflected the man he had been running from all along, and awe because they represented something pure and untainted by his pride. His voice cracked when he confessed that he had never known love, not even from his father, who had raised him with fists and insults. "I didn't know how to stay," he whispered, tears glistening in his eyes. "But I want to learn. I want to try. I want to be more than my mistakes." Ifeanyi listened quietly, her arms folded across her chest, her heart pounding in conflict. She had waited years for words like these, honest, raw, stripped of pride. Yet pain still lingered, and she feared believing him only to be betrayed again. She wanted to tell him his confessions were too late, that scars don't vanish because a man suddenly feels regret. But as she looked at him, she saw not the careless millionaire who had left her with shame, but a broken man, a boy still haunted by his own wounds. She saw sincerity in his trembling hands, and in the way his eyes refused to leave hers. Her anger softened against her will, though she forced her face to remain stern. "Words are easy," she finally said, her voice calm but heavy. "But if you mean what you say, then let your actions prove it. I won't gamble my son's hearts on promises." Chucks nodded, his chest tightening with both relief and determination. He wasn't asking for forgiveness in that moment. He was asking for a chance to earn it. That night, for the first time, Ifinanya allowed him to stay late into the evening. They spoke of the children's dreams, their struggles, even their silly little habits. When he left, she found herself lingering at the door, staring at his fading figure. Against her better judgment, hope stirred quietly inside her heart, a hope she had buried long ago. The weeks that followed carried a strange shift. Chucks no longer stormed into her life with entitlement. He slipped in quietly, showing up not with gifts, but with presence. He joined the twins on Saturday mornings to play football in the dusty compound, laughing and tripping clumsily as neighbors peeked from their windows. He accompanied Ifinanya to the market, carrying baskets of tomatoes and yams without complaint, ignoring the stares of shocked traders. He even spent afternoons helping her cook, fumbling with knives and spices until the children burst into laughter at his clumsy efforts. These simple acts, unglamorous and genuine, chipped away at the walls Ifinanya had built around her heart. Slowly, she began to see him not as the millionaire she once despised, but as a man learning the language of humility. Conversations between them deepened. Late into the night, after the children had fallen asleep, they would sit outside under the stars, talking about their pasts. Ifinanya shared her struggles, the hunger, the insults, the loneliness of raising twins with no hand to hold. Chucks listened without interruption, his face etched with guilt and admiration. For the first time, he saw the strength in her scars, the quiet power in her endurance. And she, though reluctant, began to see the sincerity in his gaze, the yearning of a man who no longer wanted to conquer, but to belong. Their laughter returned, soft, hesitant at first, but real. One evening, as they walked back from church with the twins skipping ahead, Chucks reached out and brushed his fingers lightly against hers. She stiffened, ready to pull away, but something held her still. Their eyes met, and in that quiet, wordless exchange, the weight of 5 years of bitterness lifted slightly. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the fragile beginning of something that felt dangerously close to love. But love, once it begins to bloom, rarely escapes the eyes of the world. News of their growing closeness spread quickly through Enugu society. Gossip whispered that the great Chukwudi Nadi had lowered himself to a hotel girl. Former mistresses sneered, business rivals mocked, and even some members of his extended family grumbled about disgrace. One afternoon, Ifinanya was humiliated when women at the market openly laughed, accusing her of using her twins to trap a wealthy man. The sting of their words brought back years of pain, and she returned home in tears, vowing to cut ties with him before the ridicule destroyed her dignity all over again. When Chucks heard what had happened, his fury was unmatched. But instead of confronting the gossips in private, he made a choice that stunned everyone. At a high-profile charity gala, cameras flashing and microphones blaring, he arrived not with a glamorous mistress or wealthy business partner, but with Ifinanya and the twins by his side. He held her hand firmly, ignoring the gasps and whispers, and introduced her proudly as the mother of his children. "This is my family," he said clearly, his voice steady. "Judge me if you want, but this is where my heart belongs." The room fell silent, reporters scrambling to capture the moment. For the first time, Chucks publicly stood by her without shame, risking his reputation for the woman and children he had once abandoned. Ifinanya, overwhelmed, tried to hide her trembling hands. She had never been paraded in bright lights, never imagined a man of his stature would defy the world for her. Though she wanted to remain cautious, her heart betrayed her. She saw in him a man no longer enslaved by pride, willing to burn bridges to stand beside her. That night, as they returned home, she whispered a quiet prayer, torn between fear and gratitude. Perhaps, just perhaps, this time love would not fail her. Months passed, and the bond between them deepened. By now, the twins had grown used to Chuck's constant presence, even calling him Papa without hesitation. Ifeanyi, though still cautious, allowed herself to laugh with him more, to lean on him when the weight grew heavy. Chuck's, transformed, found joy in simple things he had once scorned. Sitting on the floor to play Ludo, sharing a plate of jollof rice, or joining family prayers at night. The emptiness that once haunted his mansion was now replaced with the warmth of a home he never thought he needed. Then one evening, during a quiet family dinner in her flat, Chuck's stood suddenly. The twins, curious, stopped eating, their big eyes fixed on him. Ifeanyi frowned, unsure what he was up to. With trembling hands, Chuck's pulled out a small velvet box. But instead of turning to her immediately, he knelt before the twins. "Santo Camila," he said softly, "will you let me be your father, not just in name but in every way?" The boys giggled and shouted, "Yes, Papa," before throwing their arms around him. Only then did he turn to Ifeanyi, his eyes brimming with tears. "Ife, I have wronged you more than I can ever repair, but I love you. Not for what you've endured, but for who you are, the strongest woman I've ever known. Will you marry me? And let me spend the rest of my life proving that I can love you right." The room fell silent, the only sound the beating of Ifeanyi's heart. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she struggled to speak. For years she had dreamed of this moment, then cursed herself for wanting it, then buried the hope completely. Yet here he was, not as the arrogant man who once abandoned her, but as a humbled soul offering his life to her and their children. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Yes." The twins clapped, their laughter filling the room. In that small, humble flat, without cameras or grandeur, a broken love story was reborn into something whole. Their wedding was not the flashy spectacle people expected from a man of Chuck's wealth. Instead, it was a modest ceremony at a small church, attended by close friends, supportive neighbors, and a few stunned relatives who never imagined such an ending. Ifeanyi walked down the aisle in a simple white gown, her smile radiant, her scars hidden beneath layers of grace. Chuck's waited at the altar, tears streaming openly as the twins walked proudly ahead of her, carrying the rings. The vows they exchanged were not about perfection, but about redemption, about choosing to rebuild what once was shattered. "For better, for worse," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I choose you." And for the first time, she believed him. The celebration afterward was filled with laughter, not wealth. Children from the compound danced, women from the market ululated, and the twins ran about shouting, "Our mummy and papa are married." It wasn't society's idea of glamour, but it was real, and it was theirs. Chuck's, once a man who measured success by cars and contracts, now measured it by the smiles of his sons and the warmth of the woman who finally forgave him. As the sun set that evening, Chuck's carried the twins on his shoulders while holding Ifeanyi's hand. For the first time in his life, he felt complete. The emptiness was gone, replaced by a home built not on wealth or pride, but on love, forgiveness, and second chances. Their story had begun in recklessness and pain, but it ended in redemption, proof that even broken beginnings could blossom into a family reborn. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for watching and listening. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.